I read your article in Forbes. You mentioned in there that this is going to be the most likely the most watched Super Bowl ever. I guess it's going to beat out the Olympics in Atlanta, Georgia, back in '96. Why do you think this is going to be the most watched Super Bowl?
Sure. Well, you have a number of factors here. One is that you're in the media capital of the world, not only the biggest media market in the United States, but essentially the entire globe. And then on top of that, you have an amazing storyline. You have two #1 seeds playing with Peyton Manning, who's probably the biggest name in the NFL right now. So it's almost the perfect storm. You put it in New York, plus the outdoor venue, first time that the game is being played in a cold weather outdoor venue. And it looks like we're going to have essentially the most watched Super Bowl ever, and it could have the largest economic impact of any sporting event in the country's history.
In your article, you have that companies are going to pay over $4 million just for 30 seconds for a commercial to advertise. Why do you think they're paying so much just for 30 seconds?
Well, I mean, the Super Bowl offers an amazing opportunity to get in front of more consumers at one single moment than any other media outlet and channel at any time during the year. So you're going to have over 100 million people watching, and it is the place to not only build the brand awareness, but to get out to more people at one time than every other. It's interesting because obviously every year the money escalates when it comes to these 30-second commercials, and it seems like a lot of these companies are essentially being pushed out of the market, and so you're having more of the traditional Pepsis and Anheuser-Busch's and GoDaddy's, companies with big marketing payrolls, taking over these commercials, and some of the smaller companies that we've seen in years past are not having the same type of opportunity to be able to put their commercials up.
Are more people willing to spend $4 million on this commercial because the game just happens to be in New York and it's New York-based companies that are spending this money?
I think that there may be a little bit more of a sectionist factor to it this year because of that, but in general it seems like there's been a price escalation from the commercial standpoint over the last couple of years. So next year we're probably going to see a slight price increase. It might not be the same as it was this year, but it's going to continue to go up, and as long as there's a return on investment for these brands, I think that money is going to continue to go higher and higher.
Despite how it's being marketed, the Super Bowl is being played in New Jersey, not New York. New Jersey seems to be the little brother here, though. All the big parties are in New York. All the Super Bowl media stuff is in New York. What does Jersey stand? I mean, New York's making a whole lot of money off of this. Is Jersey making a lot of money, too?
Probably not nearly as much as New York, though. Obviously, the game is in New Jersey, and there's going to be a lot of people that are staying in New Jersey. So maybe from a hotel standpoint, they're going to make a little bit of revenue. But like you just hit upon, most people that are staying in New Jersey are heading into the city to engage in all the parties and events. You go drive through Times Square right now, and it's basically shut down with NFL taking over and putting tons of fan-centric events and hospitality components in there. So I as someone that lives in New Jersey and works in New York City, I feel for the pain of my fellow citizens here and the fact that they're not getting the attention that maybe they deserve. But by the same token, it's the New York Giants and the New York Jets for a reason, and it's because the New York City market is the one that rules around here.
We're talking with Jason Belzer. He is the president at Game Incorporated. That is Global Athlete Management Enterprises. One of the biggest things going on right now to make the move from the Super Bowl, besides that, is in college sports, there is a union being formed. It's starting right now in Northwestern University. Tell us a little bit about that union that's being formed there.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation. It's the first cited case of a group of college athletes coming together and attempting to be recognized as a union. So they petitioned for union recognition in the state of Illinois under the Steelworkers Union. And it seems like it's most of the team that's being led by their quarterback who actually just graduated. But this is a movement that's kind of been stirring over the last couple of years, and we've seen the National College Players Association run by Ramon Hogu, who is a former college athlete himself, and he had the players this year unite wearing all Players United wristbands throughout the season, including a lot of student athletes at Northwestern, and finally they kind of pulled the trigger on it. So it's interesting news, but it's still at the very, very beginning of what's going to be a very long journey to unionization. And I think student athletes at Northwestern have made it clear that at this time it's not about the money. It's about making sure that they have being protected from a health standpoint, making sure that they have an opportunity if they do get injured at some point during their college career, make sure that they're adequately compensated at some point later on. So again, it's very early on in this process, and they still have not been recognized, obviously. The fact that they're a private school is key because many state laws, the way that college athletic departments are run right now, would not recognize college athletes as a union if they go to a public school. So it's a good place to start, and I think that this is going to be the beginning of what is going to be many of these types of situations over the next year or two.
You mentioned how it starts from a safety aspect, which is what they said, it's not about the money, not about making money, but eventually it's going to lead to that, you have to assume. Do you think at some point in time, I'll put a year on it, I'll say in the next couple of years, college athletes are going to start getting paid?
I don't think that they're ever going to get paid. Well, I know for a fact that they're ever going to get paid in the sense that NFL players get paid. I think that there's going to be an increase potentially from a stipend standpoint, where you might see student athletes, football and men's basketball players get a few extra $1,000 a year. The biggest issue is that the minute that you actually start paying student athletes, they don't become student athletes anymore, they become employers or employees. And all of a sudden you have these college athletic departments are, one, going to lose their nonprofit status. And even if they manage to get around that, the minute that you have employees, there's something called workers' compensation that you have to pay for those employees. And there's not one single college athletic department in this country, including the University of Texas, who makes $50 million on athletics, that can afford to pay workers' compensation for student athletes. It's just a huge burden that is not possible to be rectified from a market standpoint, the way that college athletics is run right now. So yes, they're eventually, I think, going to get a little bit more from a stipend standpoint, but I don't think that they're ever going to get time where they're going to be straight up paid like you see in the pro league.
Jump back to the Super Bowl for a minute. Everything going on there with the amount of money that's being made and just how popular it is. And even though they keep talking about the weather, and obviously the weather is really not going to be an issue now, do you think in the next couple of years the Super Bowl will ever be played back in a cold weather stadium again?
I think so. I don't think that the weather has that big of an impact on whether or not it might come back to a cold weather situation. Even if it was going to be 10 degrees and snowing on Sunday, there's other things that play into this, and I think that's the response of the New York State market. If this is going to be, or turns out to be, the highest rated Super Bowl of all time, that's going to be a pretty hard thing to pass up in the future to bring the game back to New York. So this is really a test for the NFL to determine whether or not this is something that's feasible. I think that they may actually be a little miffed that there's not going to have that bad weather component, because if people hear that it's going to be snowing during the game and it's going to be cold, that's going to actually attract more eyeballs. So we might see some numbers that were not necessarily as optimistic as it was predicted, because of the fact that it is going to be essentially a mild weather game.
What other city do you think will be able to host the Super Bowl? Because New York has such a big market and will draw all the money and everything. What other city is comparable to New York?
Nothing is really comparable to New York other than maybe Los Angeles. But Los Angeles obviously would be a kind of quote-unquote warm weather city at this time of the year. You look at Chicago, potentially an option. Although Chicago seems to be even colder this time of year than New York. But if it goes well this weekend, as it looks like it will, I would not be surprised if the Super Bowl makes its way back to New York City within the next 5 or 6 years. It just makes a lot of sense, and it's a proven product, and there's no reason why they can't come back and keep that novelty component. I don't think you're going to see it that often where we're going to see a Chicago next time or a Boston or something like that. Probably going to stay with New York if they're going to go from that cold weather standpoint.
You mentioned Los Angeles as the warm city choice. Of you being in the sports business side of it, what's the chances that you see a Super Bowl in Los Angeles before you see a team back in Los Angeles? I
think there's a very, very good chance that you would see a Super Bowl there before you would see a professional team. The biggest issue with LA and the new team is that a lot of people from a civic standpoint, whether it's politicians in Southern California, and just general population that does not want a professional sports team because they do not want to subsidize the construction of a stadium. And there's enough entertainment choices in Southern California, and that's why they look at it as a lose-lose proposition. So that's been the struggle there. It's not like someone can't show up and do something. It's the fact that there's just not a lot of support for professionals. But a Super Bowl or the like, obviously, is something that's a lot easier to do. And I would see them essentially attempting to build an arena or a stadium and say, we're going to track the Super Bowl here once every couple of years, and then trying to get it from there. And I think that's probably going to be their best route, but I don't see that happening for at least another 5 to 10 years.
We had a guest on earlier who mentioned that the marketing side of the Super Bowl right now is with the marijuana and how the both states have legalized the marijuana. You're able to put those 2 states on a shirt and make it into a Super Bowl shirt. Is that a good marketing side for the sports business world? Would you be able to sell that a shirt with 2 states that legalize marijuana on it?
I mean, I don't know how much of an impact that actually has. Obviously, the problem with something like that is that in order to, put those teams on a shirt and then put some kind of association with marijuana, even though the drug is legal in those states, I highly doubt you're going to be able to get a license from either of those teams to use their logos, or then you're definitely not going to get a license from the NFL. But yeah, I mean, everything is marketable. I think that people are going to find a way to make money off of everything, and I wouldn't be surprised if there are shirts like that out there that are, unlicensed. But, the fans have come out in force. You walk around New York City today and tomorrow and over the weekend, you'll see, I just walked by a throng of Seattle Seahawks fans, and it's great to see people crossing the country and willing to spend a few dollars to come out and support their team, and we're excited here.
What team, in your opinion, has traveled better from what you've seen?
From what I've seen, it's definitely the Seahawks. There's definitely Broncos fans out there, but I think Seattle obviously is known to have one of the best, if not the best, fan bases of professional sports. I think that this has been a long time coming, and I think people were prepared earlier in the year knowing that their team had a good shot to make it to the Super Bowl. And because of that, people made money and knew that they might have to make a trip out here. And so that's why they've been able to come out. And I think that even though in most Super Bowls you don't see half of the Super Bowl is usually not fans, they're usually local people or corporate hospitality owners. But I think that you're going to see an overwhelming majority of Seattle Seahawks fans learn from it over the Broncos.
2 more things before we get out of here. The first thing is Freddie, I don't know if you saw this, but Freddie Couples had 2 Super Bowl tickets. He actually ended up, though, he'll be playing in the golf tournament this weekend, so he's unable to attend the Super Bowl. What do you think he should do with his tickets from the business side? Should he sell them and make the money off them, or should he donate them to a charity?
That's a good question. It seems like the ticket market has kind of bottomed out. Tickets are basically the lowest that they've been in the last couple of years, even though the matchup is essentially a really, really good matchup. The reason is because those teams are so far away that fans are not coming out as strong as they were because it's a big distance. If I were him, he'd maybe make $2,000, $3,000 off those tickets, but that's what I think he probably should donate to charity because, you're not going to really walk away with much profit either way.
The last thing before we get out here was ask all our guests for a last call. The last call is basically a shout-out to something in sports or sports-related. Jason Belzer, what would be your last call this evening?
I'm looking forward to next year's All-Star Weekend in New York and New Jersey. I think that it's going to be the first time that 2 teams are essentially sharing the honor of hosting the Nets and the Knicks. And the Super Bowl this weekend is almost a test run for what's going to be a crazy couple of days next year in New York City. So